Good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion on teachers and families coping with back to school stress. My name is John Boyd, and I am the CEO of Mental Health and Addiction Care for Sutter Health. And we're really excited to be partnering with Mental Health America and the Mental Health Coalition to talk about this unique mental health challenges associated with this year and all that is going on. We at Sutter Health believe that mental health is human health and that it's a foundational, fundamental responsibility to ensure that our youth and those that we entrust to educate them are supported in all regards. And that includes relevant prevention, early intervention, and coping strategies for kids and youth, but also for teachers themselves. And now I want to introduce today's moderator, Amy Kennedy, friend, colleague, and an incredible parent and teacher. She's the education director of the Kennedy Forum, where she pursues partnerships and collaborations that emphasize evidence-based research and programming to facilitate policy change in the areas of education and mental health. With over 15 years of experience working in public schools, Amy has seen firsthand how a child's mental health impacts their ability to learn and to grow, not only in the classroom, but in life. Her experience as a teacher and as a mother of 5 propel efforts and advocacy around social emotional learning and mental wellness for children and adolescents. Amy knows that by supporting educators and working with community partners to create robust mental health systems within our schools, that it is possible to intervene early and identify students' needs. She is a phenomenal leader, phenomenal mother, and she will be an incredible facilitator. She serves on Mental Health America and JED Foundation boards, just to name a few, as well as Brain Futures. She holds a bachelor's degree in elementary education from Pennsylvania State University and a master's degree in environmental education from Nova Southeastern University. Amy and her husband, former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, live in Southern New Jersey with their 5 incredible children. With that said, thank you, Amy, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate that. That was a generous introduction, and I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's discussion on teachers and families and coping with back to school stress. I'll introduce our guests in just a moment, but first I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. This session's being recorded. Both the recording and a one-pager highlighting key takeaways and resources from this discussion will be emailed out to all of the registrants within 1 week. We don't offer CEUs, but if you'd like a certificate of attendance, we have a form for you to request one, and we'll post the link to that form in the chat periodically, and it will be included in the follow-up email as well. Finally, we should have some time for audience questions, so please post your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation, and we'll go through some at the end. Feel free to make comments or share some of your own knowledge in there as well. And now I'm so excited to introduce our 2 panelists today, Dr. Mark Brackett and Dr. Anisha Patel Dunn. First, Dr. Mark Brackett is the founding director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor in the Child Study Center, Yale School of Medicine at Yale University. His grant-funded research focuses on the role of emotions in learning, decision-making, creativity, relationship quality, well-being, performance, really everything. And Mark has published over 150 scholarly articles, received numerous awards, is featured all the time on popular media outlets like the New York Times, Good Morning America, The Today Show. He's also on the board of directors for one of my favorite organizations, CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and the Mental Health Coalition Program Board. Mark is the lead developer of Ruler, which is a systematic evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that's been adopted by over 3,000 public, charter, and independent preschool through high schools across the United States and around the world. Research shows that Ruler boosts academic performance, decreases bullying, enriches classroom climates, and important for today's discussion, it reduces teacher stress and burnout and enhances teacher instructional practices. Mark is the author of Permission to Feel, which some of you may have already read I know Mark has his own following, and I have a copy of that book. I've given that book out to others as gifts. It's fantastic. We're also joined by Dr. Anisha Patel Dunn, who serves as the Executive Vice President of the LifeStance Health Foundation. Anisha is nearly 20 years of experience as a practicing psychiatrist and managing a large group practice, having co-founded Pacific Coast Psychiatric Association in 2006, now part of LifeStance Health in San Francisco. She also serves as the Chief Medical Officer at LifeStance Health, where she's responsible for overseeing all clinical services delivered through LifeStance and ensuring that care quality meets and exceeds professional standards. Anisha holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Emory University and received a medical degree from the College of Osteopathic Medicine of the Pacific at Western University of Health Sciences. She completed her adult psychiatry residency training at California Pacific Medical Center and is a board certified adult psychiatrist. So thank you both for joining us today. That was a mouthful. What impressive resumes. And I know you can offer us really great insight, but let's maybe think about how we can talk specifically to this year and this year's challenges. How is this year's back to school experience different for students this year? Mark, do you mind starting?
Yeah, it's just to put it out there, it's crazy. Um, I've been on, I haven't been on the road for a long time because of COVID, but now, with things getting better, I am traveling. I just was in Washington State working with the superintendents in that state, and now I'm in Alaska right this moment. And an hour from now, I got to do another presentation with superintendents. But I can tell you, the concerns they're so multifaceted. People are more anxious than they've ever been before, just about whatever the new normal is. And our research shows, that children are feeling not so much anxious, but they're frustrated, they've been overwhelmed, they're bored. That teachers, the number one emotion for we have a big study of 27,000 teachers across the United States going on right now. The number one feeling is anxiety, then overwhelmed and stressed. And so I think this is an amazing opportunity for all of us to talk about what we can do to support the adults who are raising and teaching kids.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing from my friends in the classroom who are saying for a lot of them, they feel like they're teaching kids how to be back in a classroom, that they've forgotten what that's like. And this is starting from scratch. What are you saying, Dr. Patel Dunn?
Yeah, so I think that I want to emphasize obviously the anxiety, but the disappointment. I think there was a bit of a glimmer this summer that potentially things would go back, quotes, to sort of prior to the pandemic. And what we are seeing is, children are going back to school, but still, with COVID protocols, right, wearing their masks. I think even some of those rituals of, teacher day or the day before you get when you get your assignments and all of that in person, we've seen that be virtual this year. And so I do actually emphasize that disappointment is really so top of mind for a lot of our students, and then just anxiety around, will it ever be back to how it was prior to the pandemic? And so certainly my heart is really going out to all our students. And I think even just not only, so those are, grade school, elementary school, middle school, high school, but then our college students as well, who, especially the ones that maybe their freshman year was virtual and now they're, second year, they're back on campus, and it's really actually their first year. So I've seen that. And so those transitional years, where last year was virtual maybe, and now in person, it's just a completely different experience.
Absolutely. I have my own range of kids, as John mentioned. So we have 5 kids, and the oldest is 13. The youngest is starting school this year at age 3 for pre-K 3. So for him, he's never known it any other way than what he's experiencing. But I do think about how this is different for parents, for guardians, for caretakers. preparing young people to go back and how we support them. Do you have thoughts about that, Mark? What we could be doing to, if you are a caregiver, to be able to support that experience?
Yeah, I think, it's funny because I just got off of a staff meeting with my team at Yale. We have 60 people, and we're going through the same exact thing as everybody else is going through because we have plenty of parents who are, have children in schools and not in schools. We've got parents who are supporting, their parents, and so people are experiencing. Oh, are we frozen? Did you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. It looked like your smile was infectious. It was frozen. I was like, wow, I don't, you were so riveted. I couldn't believe it. Anyhow, um, you know, you mentioned, my work on emotional intelligence, and I think, the first piece of this is, as I wrote about, which is we just got to give ourselves the permission to have all these feelings because you can't tell someone not to feel the way they feel about their experiences. And I think that we have this one of the challenges with our mental health, in America is that, we see anxiety and fear and disappointment and frustration as like bad things to experience and things to get rid of. And I just think that if we live with that mindset as the adults, then we're just constantly trying to fix it, fix it, fix it. And there's no fixing feelings, right? There's being with our feelings and finding strategies as parents, as teachers, as communities to support everyone in dealing with those feelings, in helpful ways and productive ways. So that's my main advice is that give yourself the permission to experience these emotions. They're real, but don't necessarily allow them to have power over everything you're doing. And that's where the magic is.
Yeah, I can imagine, Anisha, that you're seeing things from dealing with a lot of adults, a perspective where maybe the adults are very overwhelmed, still trying to balance so much and, having all of these emotions, but maybe not being able to regulate that in a way that's productive right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I really echo Mark in sort of this giving people permission to really feel the gamut of emotions. And I do think actually our caretakers have really been, especially the ones, Mark, you mentioned, sort of the caretakers that are then juggling other, they have their dependent elderly, maybe they have a full-time job, right? They're trying to juggle all of this. And so almost coming out of the fight or flight of just barely keeping everything together as best they can. And now, at least in most areas, the children going back to school, but then it's still not quite how everyone would like it to be. And I think being able to just allow yourself as caretakers the opportunity to feel those emotions, to reach out and get help if you want. If it's something you're even questioning, please just reach out for some therapy. It can be so helpful. So I do think we've seen across the pandemic here so much more destigmatization of mental health and people reaching out and getting help. And so these caretakers, always think of the ones that are really holding so many different, so many different weights on their shoulders to really make sure they're taking care of themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you are a caretaker that has a young person in your life that's really been having a hard time, it's hard to concentrate on anything else, including your own well-being, when that's front of mind. It's hard to put that to the side and say, let me first make sure that I'm in a good place so that I can be a support for others. And I think that's probably true of the educators that are dealing with this day to day. That's the realm that I've operated in as a teacher, and I know that it can be really challenging. I've just heard from so many people in my own life. My sister-in-law is in the classroom now. Both my parents were educators, and all of my former colleagues that are saying how difficult this time has been.
Yeah.
How
Amy,
have How have teachers been impacted by the pandemic?
I just want to go back to what you were just mentioning though, because
Yeah.
I think many teachers and leaders of schools have been impacted in ways that for example, they're subconsciously thinking, right, I've got to be positive all the time. Like I got to show my resilience. And, you know, people call that in many ways toxic positivity. Like, no, Mr. Brackett is doing great. No, it's, and I'm looking like I'm saying I'm great and my voice is shaking and, and I look like I'm like freaking out, but I'm trying to pretend that I'm feeling this way as opposed to being real and saying, you know what, Mr. Brackett is actually feeling really stressed right now, but here's what I'm doing to help me manage my stress.
Mhm.
And so, what you're doing in that situation is you're not putting the onus on the children to deal with your feelings, but you're being real and honest with kids, saying, you know what, I'm like you, I'm worried too, but I've got great things that I do to support me in managing my feelings. And to me, that's the first step in the teacher or the educator um, being a support network for the kids. It's not necessarily teaching the kids strategies, it's modeling transparency in age appropriate ways and modeling healthy self emotion regulation, which I think we could do a lot more of.
Yeah, I like that. So that real modeling, which I'm sure does look different depending on how old the kids are and that you're working with, but I love that. One of the comments somebody just said, vulnerability. I think that that seems like such a key piece in building a trusting relationship with the students in being real, right? Being
Well,
real.
because just, and I certainly want to hear from Anisha, um, but I think the challenge with the teacher who's always going in saying everything's fine and we're going to be great is that the kids are saying, well, it doesn't feel very great to me and I'm really nervous. And why is my teacher always feeling positive and happy when it doesn't feel that way in the real world or at home? And so it denies kids, right, the ability to be their true fulfilling selves. And that discrepancy, as you think about it as children develop, is what creates the next generation of people who are suppressing and repressing their feelings.
Yeah. But before we move on, could you tell us a little bit more about the study that you mentioned? You said 27,000 teachers.
So briefly, we during the pandemic we decided to find out how our teachers were doing, and we got a grant to do this. And what we did was we tracked teachers 6 times throughout the pandemic to understand what are their experiences. Um, and I could talk about this for the whole hour, so I won't do that. But what I will say is that we also want to focus on not how people are feeling, but how they hope to feel. Because sometimes asking people, how would you like to feel, is a nice gateway to creating strategies to support them in feeling the way they want to feel. And I'll just say right now to everyone, that the number one emotion that educators have expressed to us that they want to feel more often is, anyone, Anisha, Amy, you want to guess?
Optimistic? I don't know. No.
Appreciate
Happy,
it.
Oh,
appreciated.
appreciated. Ah,
Appreciate it. And so for leaders on this call, and everyone else, think about what can we do as a school community to ensure that we're just showing our appreciation, because that goes a really long way.
wow. Appreciated. I would think everyone would just say, oh, I want to feel happy. Even though I know you've told us through permission to feel, there are a lot of other emotions out there. It's not just happy and sad. Um,
Yeah.
Appreciated. That's
What
fantastic.
in a 2018 study, the number one word was happy,
Yeah.
but in 2020, 21, appreciated. So
Mm,
it's interesting. People are just feeling that need to be seen and heard.
yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, a really hats off to our courageous teachers across this country. My husband is a middle school, elementary school music teacher, and just so firsthand here seeing, I think through his lens of concern, for students, but then also for family, potentially, especially with COVID and the Delta variant now, of what are the risks that our teachers are putting themselves through. Obviously, we're trying to be really careful. And I do think that the schools have done a great job in that, in following safety protocols, but there's sort of this edge on their seats of, are they going to get sick? Are they going to pass it along? I mean, similar to what we see, I think, in our frontline healthcare workers as well. And so just this kind of guilt and concern, but sort of dedication and devotion to the work they do. So I really, very much appreciative of that, but I do think that that's something, yeah, Mark, you note that we need to do more of.
Yeah. So then I'll follow up with you, Anisha. Are you seeing? You mentioned guilt, and we've heard a lot about anxiety. Are we seeing different types of struggles now than before? Is that?
Yeah. So I think
our impression.
Yeah. So, and just, I think in my direct patient experiences as well, and sort of hearing with my colleagues, those of us who may have, people that we're working with that are teachers, I do think this really weighs heavy in this, especially this, I think teachers' hearts, right, are really in helping children and really, teaching, educating, fostering growth and development, and then the sort of straddling what are they putting themselves through, what risks are they bringing, especially if they're not, they don't live alone, they've got other people at home with them and other dependents. So I do think that there's a lot of anxiety there too in our teachers. Anxiety, I think just the feeling of, at what level are they do they put their own needs first? I think that's something also that's not really part of the core of our teachers. They're always looking out for the children. And so, our teachers that may have other underlying health conditions, that they may be more vulnerable to some of the pandemic, some of the COVID variants. I think there's just a lot that comes up. So we are seeing that.
Yeah, it's I think we're seeing too, depending on where you live, your region of the country, and how that return to school has looked different, is probably impacting people differently. Have you also noticed that social and economic inequities have been exacerbated, and that's showing up in the classroom this year because of how this is kind of played out, depending on where people are living and how their families are experiencing COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I was actually talking with a superintendent. I won't mention the district's name just for respect, but it's a very high poverty district in the state of Washington, and they're closing classrooms as we speak in the beginning of the school year. They have lower resources than other districts. Most of the parents some of them are undocumented immigrants who are struggling with food scarcity, with finding work. And so they're, and then, we hear from private schools in New York City who have, shields built around the classrooms and have all these resources. And so there definitely are challenges, in our country around making sure, that all children get the supports that they need to be both physically and psychologically healthy. And we need to work on that.
So much. Now, there are a lot of people who serve in helping roles, like parents and teachers, that often have trouble, as Anisha mentioned, seeking out support for themselves. It's interesting. As we're all talking, I'm looking at a few of the comments, and we know that we're talking about how we support all of those in these helping roles, but the comments even are saying, what can we do to help promote this and to make sure our students are getting what they need? Even the focus, even on the chat, it moves from themselves to looking out for youth. But how do we help support the parents and teachers who often have trouble seeking out support for themselves? Why is self-care so important for the adults and young people's lives? Anisha?
Yeah, so I think just in thinking about modeling with Mark, right, that just on one level, really us trying to encourage and support our teachers and our caretakers, the parents, for getting help. Also, in them getting help openly, really encourages children and youth who are struggling to get help, right? And so that's probably very different than, say, my generation of growing up in not seeing that through from my parents, how easily or open people are to that. But I think we also have to recognize, just being, just even making sure people have time in their schedule, right? So I commend everybody in our profession of really being able to overnight convert to doing teletherapy and telepsychiatry. And so now let's not forget that if you're even, a teacher and you're at school, can you have an appointment at a break time or, during right before school, right after school? I think we just have to really try to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to access care from both ends. So not only, from my end for what we do, really trying to help support, and encourage ease of use of getting an appointment online any time of day or night, but then really from employers, from our schools, can we make sure that we're supporting our teachers and being able to, get help. And then even our parents, our caretakers, right? Just trying to really make sure that, this one of the things from COVID that I know I personally suffer from is work. Just there, every hour of the day is work. There's no other, there's
Are you
nothing
working
else.
from home or living at work, they say, right?
Yes, exactly.
You mentioned stigma and how there has been a shift and people have been more open, but do you think that there is still stigma for trying to seek that help or that time or asking for it even at work? Mark, are you hearing that as you're with superintendents? Are educators, are their staff saying, hey, we need this? Or are superintendents really trying to anticipate the needs and put those in proactively?
It's interesting because I think educators have been trained to think about kids, right? They're mostly looking for resources to support children's trauma, children's mental health issues. And they forget that they're in that circle of people they need to take care of, with whom they need to, well, you get my grammatical skills today are a little off.
Yeah, I get it.
But, one of the things that I think is so important is that, we haven't really taught educators a lot about healthy emotion regulation. I put into the chat, we've developed a free course that's available for educators across the world. We've had 80,000 teachers take it at this point on healthy emotion regulation. So it's there for free. And that the principles of healthy emotion regulation are just, they need to be really part of like all weeks, every faculty meeting, to help educators through this time because they want to elect into it. And I was just talking with a principal in San Francisco, and he said, we asked people if they wanted to have special training in well-being. Nobody said they wanted to do it. And I said, nobody wanted to do it even during these crazy times? Like, how is that possible? And it's because the mindset is that, we're gonna figure it out. But unfortunately, from our data, they haven't figured it out. And so just one thing I want to say is that there are basic principles. For example, like when you're anxious and overwhelmed and you're ruminating about things, it's impossible to be present, right? Because your brain is in fight, flight, freeze mode. And so just knowing that basic breathing exercises can help you deactivate, being with people that you love and care for, that care for you, all of that settles your nervous system so that then you can be more present and apply some of the more complex cognitive strategies. And then I don't know about each of you, but during the pandemic, I thought I'm going into this pandemic with I'm the expert in emotional intelligence. And I can tell you, there were moments when I completely just blew up. My mother-in-law was living with us and we got on each other's nerves. And, it was oof, I'm used to her being around for 2 weeks, not 5 months. And it was not good. And I won't go into the whole details of that meltdown, but my point is that even someone like myself who knows a lot about this struggled.
Yeah.
And so I just think about what it's like for that kindergartner or fifth grader who doesn't have consistent exposure to healthy strategies. And it becomes our moral obligation, right, to make this a permanent part of our education system.
And it seems, from listening to that comment, when we talk about electing into, learning more about this or taking the time to do it, it's really easy for people to say, I already have too much to do. I don't have time to
Right.
do one more thing. And that there has to be a real mindset shift to say, we'll actually work better and more focused, because we won't have all those ruminating thoughts, and we won't be preoccupied if
Yeah.
we take the time to really focus on this. It's like as Patrick, for those of you that I know, Mark knows Patrick, he always talks about a force multiplier, that we need to think about this as something that's really an enhancement. And I think the big corporations are starting to think this way, as they're all talking about workplace mental health, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's going to help their productivity or time on task. We talk about time on task for our students, and are they distracted? Are they able to focus? Well, the same is true of our educators, of our parents. Am I distracted when my kids are around and I'm, scrolling on my phone, or am I present and actually engaged? I think we as a society haven't really tapped into that shift of how we make this a priority, because it'll increase our overall, not just performance, but
Yeah, one thing that I just want to say quickly is that you might think of teacher stress and teacher wellness as an equity challenge, right? Because a stressed out teacher, an overwhelmed teacher, is not going to be their best in the classroom. And I think one piece of research might inspire people to take this seriously, which is the work on emotional contagion, which is that a teacher who is stressed out and overwhelmed, vocal tone, facial expressions, body language, etc., that stress experience is contagious to their students, and it happens subconsciously. So all of a sudden, students themselves are feeling overwhelmed and stressed in that classroom, but they have no idea why. But it's coming from the adult who is modeling the stress and anxiety. And so when you think about it in those terms, again, it becomes our obligation as educators to really have those effective strategies.
so how do we, really, what does it look like, I guess? Because I know we can talk a lot about meditation and think, what does it look like for someone to take care of themselves, for them to have this, practice self-care? Is it taking a walk and a water break and meditation? Are there other things that kind of qualify that maybe we wouldn't think of? Anisha?
Yeah, it's interesting. I find all throughout the pandemic and still in my direct patient care that I repeat sort of the same mantra. And I don't know if it's, when you say it that way, Amy, it seems so reasonable, but I do think it's this really, and Mark, you alluded to this too, this sort of back to some of the basics of self-care, right? What is that? I think that's really where a structure of really making sure you're getting enough sleep, you're trying to go to bed at the same time every day and wake up at the same time, really trying to focus on your health and nutrition so that it's getting out and, in whatever way, getting the exercise. I think in the heart of the pandemic, when people weren't feeling comfortable even leaving their house, how do you do, Zumba? But really, so I think of physical well-being and mental well-being, right? And so they go hand in hand as well, so that your practice of, if you've got some meditation that you're doing, some ritual that you're focusing on your self-care. So, the exercise, the sleep, the nutrition. And I think that with all of that too is surrounding or getting the support you need, the emotional support you need from your friends or your family, right? We're all different personalities, introverts, extroverts, but I do think that, making sure you're taking time to have those connections. And there's so much grief and loss we've had in missing things through the pandemic when things were really closed down. And so just reminding ourselves, and I think some of us see this as things have opened up and then some places they've closed back down, is just how much the, interaction with our loved ones can be so invaluable. And Zoom interaction is one thing, but I think even, just feeling the body language in the room with people can be so helpful. So, just some of those basics that we forget, or it's funny. I'm just like, you don't need, sometimes it's just helpful to have somebody like a professional say that. And so I do think the message too from our schools, our superintendents, our principals is highlighting that and making sure that something sort of preventative mental health, as we think of like preventative physical health, like what are things that we just have to keep encouraging, reminding, and supporting our teachers. I think some of that the messaging, as you talk about large employer groups are doing this, I think the messaging also needs to come from our, school districts.
I
Yeah.
felt so much when I taught that a lot of the, people get into it, they love children, but so much of what I got out of being in the classroom was actually from the people that I worked with, and being able to, you do the things like they show up for you, and they do the meal trains when somebody's sick, and they're, the ones that, hey, let's do a, girls' night out to dinner, and they're your buddies, and you're talking through things at your lunch break, and that kind of camaraderie that you're missing when you're on Zoom, and you don't get to have those relationships too. I can only imagine helps contribute to the feeling of burnout, of feeling not supported. Having an administrator who would reach out if you knew someone in your family were sick, or even if you lost a pet, or if it's all those things that build that feeling of belonging to this group. Mark, what do you suggest for self-care?
Yeah, I think everything Anisha said, is spot on. It sounds like I was like, I could have said the same thing you said. Um, going back to what you just said about principles, we have a good study, a couple studies actually, that show that an emotionally intelligent leader has a school that has teachers who experience more pleasant emotions, less burnout, less likely to leave the profession, more inspiration, less frustration. So yes, leadership really matters, especially during these challenging times. People want a leader who can model effective emotion regulation, who is there for them and knows that they're there for them. And so we can't forget that. Um, you know, to take some of the things that Anisha said and get like more granular or specific. The breathing exercises, right? A lot of people don't even know what those things are. They confuse it with religion. They think it's a Buddhist practice, and we try to tell people, that we are born breathing, and we have physiology, and when our physiology is activated, right, our brain goes into that fight flight mode. So when we learn how to do deep breathing exercises, it literally is a protective factor. Even with positive self-talk, people, you can't say someone like, Amy, be positive, not helpful, you know or Anisha, just think positive thoughts. Like, okay, like, how do you do that? And I think we fail to recognize how much work we have to put into this. I remember when the pandemic first hit and they said, Mark, you're going to be running your center from your kitchen table for the next 18 months. I wasn't like,
With
oh,
your
okay.
mother-in-law.
Yeah, with my mother-in-law and my puppies peeing everywhere. And it was like, just think positive thoughts. Like, okay, thank you very much. Not helpful. So the question is, like, what does Mark say to himself, when he's feeling anxious? And I think for this work to be culturally responsive and appropriate for all people, we can't be the adult knowers we have to do is create context where we know how to ask the right questions to students to support them in coming up with the strategies that will work best for them, given their personalities, given their cultural backgrounds, etc. And it can be done. It just means that we have to put more effort into it, and we have to be more deliberate about it. And then we can't just be like, oh great, Mark knows. Now Mark is saying something like I have my, I'm older, so when I'm freaking out, I say things like, Mark, you know this feeling is impermanent. There have been rainy days and there have been sunny days, and today's one of those really rainy days. But there's going to be a sunny day, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, right. Today's not going to be the end of my, the world. Everything, there will be a sunny day tomorrow, and that really works for me. Now, someone else might hear me say that and say, this guy's a weirdo, right? Like, this feeling is impermanent. Like, what does that even mean? And that's okay, because it's about finding what works for you to help you recognize that the feeling is impermanent, because all feelings are impermanent. Like, that's a great principle to live by. And so you can see just by me talking about this, like, it's effortful, deliberate. You need practice. You got to check in with the kids. Is that saying working for you? If not, let's come up with another one. Maybe you need a couple. I don't know if this resonates or not, but I'm just trying to make clear, like, we got to put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah, no, I clearly, and I like that you mentioned that you had this free online tool for educators. I would imagine, can parents or caregivers use it as well? Is it really just geared to educators for understanding our own emotions? Are you, Mark?
Is that for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, this
for
is
your
for,
tool that you said, is that something that's kind of anyone
no,
could use it, or?
anybody who, is a sentient being.
Okay.
Um, so,
Okay.
this is for this is for people in my position as a person who leads a group.
Yeah.
Everyone wants the permission to feel. Everyone wants to be their true selves. Everyone needs strategies to support them in managing transitions, difficult moments. But again, I think the beauty of the work is that I don't have to know everything.
Right.
I just have to be the compassionate caretaker, the compassionate friend who gives the space for that person to talk about it and help them think through ways that they can shift their thinking so they can manage the anxiety, in a helpful way.
Yeah.
And so the real education is in how to be a good listener. The real education is how to ask good questions, how to be, that compassionate colleague, teacher, friend who can then, support that person in that process.
So, I think there's questions on the chat that I'd love to go over, but before we get to that last part, I know that there's probably some people who have moved beyond, this being, I'm really not feeling good, to what can I do now? What's the next step? Because I know I need help. So where do I turn? Because this is such a difficult system to navigate. If you are an educator, we know we're dealing with things like in-network, out-of-network. How do we make this an easier process? What is the kind of next steps? If you've already said, this is more than I want to handle on my own, I want to seek out some additional support. Anisha, what do you recommend if you're there, or kind of how do you know you're there?
Yeah, and I right before I answer that, I noticed something pop up in the chat about the compassion fatigue. So this is something that that goes hand in hand with me answering this question, because I think this is something we see, we see also in mental health from our clinicians, right? And we hear about this, but I think this speaks so much to teachers, right? They're overall so full of compassion, and I think this question of when you're struggling or when you're not sure, I just really encourage people to get help. It's so just even an initial appointment with a licensed professional, therapist, psychotherapist to just have an initial eval to see if there's anything that, you're missing, or even just that maybe, having some individual therapy can be helpful. Sometimes medications are appropriate. It is very hard. I know this in network, out of network. I think that, looking at, often, your school systems may have some employee assistance that goes, that's a certain number of sessions for just this, and people forget about that.
Right.
But also it is so easy actually just to get online and get an appointment. I think that this is something that I do think in the field of mental health, we've been really trying to, improve access to care. That's something that's such paramount at the, Lifestance Health Foundation is really helping support that, and, a mission of improving access to care. And so encouraging people just to, look on your health plans are actually also really trying to meet the needs. And so care advocates just trying to get you set up, or, your primary care physician or clinician can help. But I think that's something that's really come out of the pandemic, is this is top of mind for so many people, that we're all trying to, healthcare workers are trying to get better access, give better access, I think employers. And so just when in doubt, just, take a few sessions. I think it's
right. Like, it's maintenance. It's all just like we do. It's all part of healthcare. It's all part of healthcare. And I have to give a little shout out to MHA, of course, that has screenings, free online screenings. So for those of you watching and you're just uncertain, and it has supports on their website. So that's a good resource as well. And if you have students, I think one of the challenging things for educators is when you see that you have students that are struggling and you're really not sure how to have that conversation with maybe their guardian or with the student themselves if they're an older student. Mark, do you have any kind of suggestions for how you talk about this in a way that doesn't feel, I don't know, scary for a teacher to maybe suggest that somebody's in need of some extra support?
Yeah, I think this is where, free tools that we have available, for example, Amy, you're familiar, Anisha, I'm not sure you are, with a tool we call the mood meter, right? Which is just a simple tool that can be done through, virtual or in person, where you're checking in with students. Let's talk about how we're feeling. And you can do it anonymously, you can do it as a group. There's no real rules around it. It's about what the classroom, what works best for the classroom. And I think what you want to do is, I really appreciate Anisha's point, which is, I'll tell you for myself, I've had a lot of therapy in life, and I'm blessed that I've had good therapists. And even during the pandemic, I've had strong feelings about my leadership, and how to support my team. And I got a coach to help me, because I'm a human being and I have strong feelings and I need help. And I'm willing to, and I think just saying that out loud is, first, it's like relieving, and B, it's been enormously helpful. And C, it models that, guess what, even people who are experts supposedly in this space, right, still need help. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's great to get external advice and non-judgmental support. But for everyday, emotions in the classroom, I think you can look for patterns, and so, for example, when you're using tools like ours, the mood meter, teachers can start taking note, Misha was in the red 5 days in a row. You know what?
Yeah.
I need to check in with her mom, right? I need to check in with, with her and find out what's really going on. What is she really feeling, and how is she managing those feelings? And then the conversation can then move on to getting, the girl some additional supports. But I will tell you that, I just want to say this out loud, that schools that take this work seriously, right, have students with fewer needs for external supports, right? Because prevention is always going to be helpful.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Before
so,
stage 4.
what's that?
I said MHA says before stage 4,
There you go.
prevention, early intervention.
And so, exactly. And you're always going to need intervention, because things always go awry and there's always going to be challenges. But the more we can prepare teachers, the more we can prepare children, you know, to manage feelings. And so many schools during the pandemic said, God, thank God we did this work. Thank God we went through this training a couple of years ago, because I can't even imagine how we would have managed the situation without these tools and strategies. So, um,
Mark,
prevention.
are you comfortable with giving us like a school that is a great model that you see really doing this work, not just with the students, but for their staff, that you could say, hey, if you want to see a school that's
I
really
could do
supportive.
that, although I'm afraid because these principals are overwhelmed right now, and so they get 350 emails from people.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
you know, um, go to our website and look. We have plenty of
Yeah.
examples in
Okay,
there.
you have some listed there.
I want to be prevention focused for the principals of these schools.
Yes, yeah. We want to know what we can borrow, right? We want to take it from another school and say, we want that in our schools. We want that in our backyard. This is the model. It's already working somewhere. How do we bring it home
Yep.
and use it?
And I say, just as leaders, if you're listening, be the role model, right? Be authentic, be real, share your feelings, but don't make your staff feel like they need to take care of you, right? And that you're falling apart. It's this tricky piece of like, yes, I'm anxious. I'm also excited though. Like you can have more than one feeling, by the way. Um, and so the excitement is about being here with all of you, and we're going to grow together. We're going to work through this together. I'm also worried about what might happen, but here's what I'm doing to support that worry.
Mhm.
As I said, please, Anisha.
Yes, I just want to add though that if you are feeling overwhelmed, it is okay, right? I think it's okay to, I think that sometimes people, you talk about if they're really struggling and they need to get help. There are times where even our teachers who are at the front line with our children, they may need to take a leave of absence for, dealing with something, mental health related, and that's okay. I think that that's something that there's a lot of guilt with that too, I see, from my lens. And so just recognizing that, pausing and getting help then will bring you back as a, better teacher, better person.
Yeah. And that's where things like our unions come into play, where we can really talk about what are the policies for our workplace. What are we championing? What are we fighting for to make sure that when we need those things that they're there? I think there's been a few comments saying that people have just gotten tired of the word self-care and they want to know what else they can do. And I think that's where this piece comes in to say, how can you also um, kind of fight to make sure that you have what you need when you need it, and things like what does your health insurance look like? What's your coverage? What are mental health sick days? Uh, are they part of your plan? And um, and not only do we have the mental health literacy in our school and the social emotional learning in our school, because we know that when we reduce all of those um, occurrences for our students, then we're able to do a better job as educators too. So I think it all goes hand in hand. So looking at our schools policies make a difference, as well as as they said, the mental health hygiene piece that we all can be exercising. So
Yeah.
um,
Amy,
this is, yeah.
I'm going to add one thing, which is, we're brought up in a society that says feeling anxious, overwhelmed is bad. It's weak, makes you weak, along with what Anisha's saying. And that we just have to wipe that thinking out of our society and culture, right? That these are real experiences that people are having based on real um, life events or internal, external events. Um, and I think part of what I would encourage people to try to do is be a little bit more reflective about, their well-being, about their relationships, about their decision, and just ask oneself, like, am I in a place, the self-care thing, I know people have gotten, there's been a lot of controversy around that, and we don't want self-care to be a privileged kind of thing. Um, and so being more like making it more around setting my own personal goals for my health and wellness, and taking the opportunity to reflect on my well-being and say, what do I need to have greater well-being? Is it taking time off? Is it better structure in my days? Is it whatever it might be? My decision making. Am I making the best decisions around sleep and nutrition and exercise? If not, what can I do to set some personal goals to be, healthier in those domains? And so, just giving people time to pause and reflect on this would be a great thing for schools to do, right? Weekly, monthly, to just give people the opportunity to have the space to do it.
That's right. One of the comments was just around making sure that we're inclusive of all the adults in the school system who help children. And I know that this is really top of mind as we're talking about mental health first aid and those types of courses, mental health ally, that we're talking about who should be included in training. But I think it's just as important in this conversation that we're talking about bus drivers, the nutrition staff, the custodians, everybody that's interacting with the young people in the school, because they're all part of that school community and under the same stresses this year and last year that are, will we be there? Are we showing up for work? And are there shortages? Are people burning out? So I think that was a great flag on the chat. One question, I think this is more Mark talking about if there were young people that are experiencing kind of emotional blunting, or you're trying to engage with young people about their feelings, but they're, tuning out and just social media, they're really not engaging in person, but they seem just more focused on TikTok, whatever it is, and you're having a hard time getting them to express emotions. What do you do in that instance?
Ignore it. No, just kidding. I think it starts with the adult role modeling again, and so imagine I'm a dad, I come home from work and I've had a fight with my colleague and I'm like irritated and I feel like I was a terrible person. And I come and say, honey, daddy had a really rough day. I said something so mean and cruel to my colleague and I can't believe I said it. And gosh, I'm thinking about what I can say to him tomorrow to apologize. And, I'm really bothered by the fact that I was like that. And then all of a sudden, like the kid is saying, wow, daddy has feelings that are not just positive. Daddy reflects on his feelings. Daddy apologizes when he makes mistakes. Daddy is reflecting on strategies for helpful regulation. Like all in that modeling, I'm now giving the permission to my kid to do the same. And so I think A, that's the first piece, and B is I think tools, and like a mood meter or others, that's helping people. I think what happens is that we don't have the language. I've kind of proven that in my research. People just don't have the words to describe their feelings. They say fine, okay, busy. And that's the extent of our vocabulary. And so having tools that help people see the full range of emotion and using vocabulary words more frequently kind of opens up the dialogue. That would be my first set of advice. I've got more, but I don't want to, we're wrapping up.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. It goes back again to that modeling. That I just want to remind everyone that there is a recording of this, so we'll be able to share that. And I'm just checking to see if there are a few other questions that some folks have asked. They come back many times to the stress management and being able to talk about kind of that conversation around what it means to be connected, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, physical connection. So I think that really resonated. Mark, one person said that after you mentioned about appreciation, they already emailed their granddaughter's teacher to tell them how much they appreciate them. So you're making a difference already, which I love that. And I think maybe while I'm just checking through these, if you could tell us, aside from kind of the ruler approach and the things that you've worked on, what's a favorite resource that you could recommend as we're kind of giving people a direction to look at in follow up to this. What else would you recommend, Anisha and Mark, as, you know, here's a great tool I've seen, or a show, a book, a podcast I've listened to, something that you would give a shout out to?
Please, Anisha.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of resources, you know, if you're really struggling, you know, the NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is something that I think is really a very great website and resource for people that are struggling, and family members or caretakers that are, yeah, especially teachers that maybe you have a student that's struggling. I do think that's a really great resource that I recommend quite often to my patients.
Great. And Mark?
I'll just add, you know, the Mental Health Coalition,
Yeah,
you know, website and resources are also there. There's just so many ideas. And I just, you know, I gave people my website, which has links to free resources and articles that are mostly around education, because that's where my research primarily focuses. And you know, I'm my last comment for everyone is this idea of like being the first. And you know what research shows is that, you know, givers are happier than takers, and which is kind of interesting. And so even with this work on appreciation that I spoke about, most people say things like, well, if you did that, then I would feel appreciated. And my theory around this is thinking about what can we all do to create a community where everyone feels appreciated. And so sometimes just being the first, like that grandma did, or whoever it was that wrote that note, like just be the first to do it. Make that contagious. Make that make appreciation contagious as opposed to stress contagious.
I love it. Well, I'm very hopeful. I feel like, as difficult as this period has been, we've also seen a lot of people change and shift their focus to being able to make this a priority. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And I thank everyone for joining on today. It's been a fantastic conversation, and we've reached the end of our hour, a little over. Thank you, Mark and Anisha, for such a valuable discussion today. We'll be in touch with everyone within the next week with the recording, a resource sheet, and the link to request your certificate of attendance. Thanks, everyone who joined us. Enjoy
Thank you,
the rest.
Amy. Bye. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Amy. Nice to meet you, Anisha. Take care.